The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt, kicking up a cloud of copper-colored dust that shimmered in the late afternoon sun. Abigail Harlow pressed her face against the smudged window, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the scattered buildings of Pinecrest Junction for the first time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Montana Territory stretched out beyond the town, like an endless sea of golden grass and towering pines, a world away from the cramped Pennsylvania textile mill she'd left behind. She smoothed down the front of her navy traveling dress, the worn fabric a reminder of all she'd sacrificed to get here. "Mama, are we finally there?" Caleb tugged at her sleeve, his small face a mirror of his twin brother's hopeful expression. At 8 years old, the boys had endured the grueling 2-week journey with remarkable patience. "Yes, my loves," she whispered, adjusting Ethan's cap where it had slipped over his eyes. "This is our new home. This is where Mr. Weston is waiting for us." The letter that had brought them here was tucked safely inside her bodice, the paper soft from countless readings. Theodore Weston's words had been a lifeline after her husband's death, left her with mounting debts and 2 growing boys. His advertisement for a bride had seemed like providence, a rancher seeking a family, promising stability in exchange for companionship and help managing his home. His letters had been kind, thoughtful, speaking of the room he'd prepared for the twins and the future they could build together. "All out for Pinecrest Junction," the driver's gruff voice cut through her thoughts. Abigail gathered their meager belongings, one trunk containing everything they owned in the world, and stepped down onto Montana soil. The town was smaller than she'd imagined, a single dusty street lined with weathered buildings. A few curious faces peered out from the general store and saloon, but there was no sign of Theodore Weston, with his tall frame and chestnut hair, as he described himself. "Mrs. Harlow?" a woman's voice called out. Abigail turned to see a stout figure hurrying toward them, flour-dusted apron flapping in the breeze. "I'm Martha Sullivan from the general store. We've been expecting you." Abigail smiled, relief washing over her. "Yes, I'm Abigail Harlow. These are my sons, Caleb and Ethan. Mr. Weston arranged for us to arrive today. Is he meeting us elsewhere?" Martha's expression shifted, her smile fading into something more complicated. She glanced at the boys, then back to Abigail. "Perhaps we should talk inside the store. You must be tired from your journey." A coldness crept into Abigail's chest as she followed Martha toward the clapboard, building with Sullivan's General Store, painted in fading letters above the door. The twins pressed close against her skirts, sensing the sudden tension. Inside, Martha offered them water and molasses cookies, which the boys accepted eagerly. She busied herself with unnecessary tidying before finally turning to face Abigail. "There's no easy way to say this, Mrs. Harlow." Martha's voice dropped low. "Theodore Weston has been missing for nearly 3 weeks now. His horse returned to the ranch riderless, and there's been no sign of him since." The room tilted slightly. "Missing? But his letters? His last letter was dated just a month ago." "I know. He was so looking forward to your arrival. Had the whole town knowing about his bride and her boys coming from back east." Martha twisted her hands in her apron. "There was a search party, of course. Marshal Blackwood led it himself." "And they found nothing?" Abigail's voice sounded distant to her own ears. Martha hesitated. They found a grave." "A grave," Abigail repeated numbly. "Up on his property, freshly dug. But when they opened it..." Martha leaned closer, glancing at the twins who were exploring the jar of peppermint sticks across the room. It was empty, not a trace of him. Some folks think maybe he changed his mind about marrying, but those who knew Theo well say that's not possible. He was a good man, honest as the day is long. Abigail clutched the edge of the counter, her knuckles whitening. 3 weeks of savings spent on the journey west. No home awaiting them, no husband. Just an empty grave and a vanished man. Where will we stay tonight? The practical question was all she could manage. You're welcome at our boarding house until things get sorted, Martha offered kindly. Mayor Porter has called a town meeting. For tomorrow, we take care of our own here in Pinecrest, even those who've just arrived. Thank you. Abigail straightened her shoulders, swallowing down the panic rising in her throat. She would not crumble, not in front of her sons. They had already lost too much. "Mama, look!" Ethan called, holding up a wooden toy horse he'd discovered. "Mr. Weston said he has real horses at his ranch. When can we see them?" Abigail's heart constricted. Before she could answer, the store door swung open with a creak of hinges. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the bright afternoon light, broad-shouldered and imposing. "Mrs. Sullivan," a deep voice rumbled. "I heard the stage arrived." The man stepped into the store, and Abigail took in the weathered face, the piercing blue eyes, and the empty sleeve of his right arm, pinned neatly at the shoulder. A silver star gleamed on his chest. "Marshal Blackwood," Martha greeted him. "This is Mrs. Harlow and her sons. They've just arrived from Pennsylvania." The marshal's gaze locked with Abigail's. There was something in those eyes, a flicker of recognition, though they'd never met, that made her stand a little straighter. "Weston's bride," he said simply. "Yes," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. "Though it seems I've traveled a long way to marry a ghost." "No body means no ghost, ma'am." His voice was gruff, but not unkind. "And in my experience, empty graves tell more tales than filled ones." His gaze shifted to the twins, who had gone quiet, staring up at the intimidating figure. The marshal's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Those Weston's boys now?" "They're Harlow's," Abigail said firmly. "And they're mine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Fair enough, Mrs. Harlow." He tipped his hat slightly. "I imagine you've got questions. I'll be in my office when you're settled." With that, he turned and left, the door swinging shut behind him. Abigail released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That's Silas Blackwood," Martha explained, watching Abigail's expression carefully. "Lost his arm at Gettysburg. Best lawman the Territory's ever seen, even one-handed. Some say he's got eyes like a hawk and instincts like a wolf." She paused. "He was Theo's friend." "I see." Abigail gathered the twins close, her mind racing with questions and fears. An empty grave, a missing groom, a one-armed lawman with piercing eyes. This was not the future she had journeyed toward. But as she looked down at Caleb and Ethan's tired, hopeful faces, she knew retreating wasn't an option. They had come too far, sacrificed too much. Whatever lay ahead in Pinecrest Junction, they would face it together. Outside, the Montana wind picked up, whistling through the gaps in the weathered buildings. The sun hung low over the distant mountains, painting the tiny town in hues of gold and amber. Abigail Harlow had arrived at the end of her planned journey, only to find herself at the beginning of a mystery she never asked to solve. The boarding house room was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds and a washstand beneath a rippled mirror. Abigail tucked the twins in together, their small bodies curled toward each other like quotation marks, the way they'd slept since infancy. She brushed the dark hair from their foreheads and pressed a kiss to each brow. "Mama," Caleb whispered. "Fighting sleep. Is Mr. Weston hiding from us?" The innocent question pierced her heart. "No, darling. Mr. Weston is lost, and sometimes when people are lost, they need help being found. Like when Ethan got lost at the market that time." His eyes were already drifting closed. Something like that. She smoothed the thin blanket over them. Sleep now. Tomorrow is a new day. Once their breathing deepened into sleep, Abigail sank onto the edge of her own bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back all day. The letter from Theodore crinkled in her bodice as she breathed. She pulled it out, unfolding the pages by the dim lamplight. "I have built a life here that lacks only the warmth of family," he had written. "Your sons would have room to grow, to run, to become the men they are meant to be. And you, dear Abigail, would never again know the bite of hunger or the chill of uncertainty. False promises, perhaps, or the sincere words of a man who had met some dark fate before he could fulfill them." When the tears subsided, determination took their place. She had not crossed half a continent to be defeated on the first day. Tomorrow, she would speak with Marshal Blackwood and learn what she could about Theodore Weston's disappearance. She would find work in this town, if necessary. She would make a home for her boys, with or without the man who had promised to be their protector. Dawn came early in the mountains, pale light filtering through the thin curtains. Abigail dressed quickly, choosing her second-best dress, a forest green cotton with minimal mending. The boys were still sleeping, exhausted from travel. She left a note with Martha, asking her to watch them for an hour, and stepped out into the cool morning air. Pinecrest Junction was coming to life around her. A wagon loaded with timber rumbled past. Two women with market baskets nodded politely as they crossed her path. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. This strange place would become familiar in time, she told herself. All new beginnings were difficult. The marshal's office was a small building next to the town's modest bank. The door was propped open with a bootjack, and the smell of coffee drifted out. Abigail hesitated at the threshold, gathering her courage, then stepped inside. Marshal Blackwood was seated at a desk cluttered with papers, a coffee cup steaming at his elbow. He looked up as she entered, those unsettling blue eyes instantly alert. "Mrs. Harlow," he acknowledged, rising to his feet in one fluid motion that belied his size. "Coffee? Thank you." She accepted the cup he poured, noticing the practiced ease with which he managed using only his left hand. "Your boys?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Still sleeping. Mrs. Sullivan is watching them." She sat, arranging her skirts carefully. "I've come about Theodore Weston." "Figured as much." He settled back into his chair. "What exactly did Theo tell you about himself in those letters?" The question caught her off guard. That he was a rancher, that he came to Montana 5 years ago and built a modest spread, that he was 36 years old, never married, and looking for companionship. She paused. "That he was ready to be a father to my sons." Blackwood's expression remained carefully neutral. Anything else about his past, perhaps his business dealings? A flicker of unease passed through her. "No. Should there have been?" The marshal took a long drink of his coffee. "Theo Weston was a good man, as far as I could tell. Worked hard, kept to himself mostly, built that ranch up from nothing." He leaned forward slightly. "But about 4 months ago, something changed. He started making trips to Helena, coming back with more money than a small cattle operation should bring in." "You think he was involved in something illegal?" The idea seemed absurd, based on the thoughtful gentleman who'd written those letters. "I think," Blackwood said carefully, "that Theo might have gotten himself into something he couldn't get out of." He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a folded paper. "This was in his cabin when we searched it after he disappeared." He slid the paper across to her. Abigail recognized Theodore's handwriting immediately, but the words made little sense. "Shipment arrives Tuesday. Meet at the Old Crawford mine. 2,000 in payment as agreed. Final delivery." She looked up confused. "What does this mean?" "Wish I knew." Blackwood reclaimed the note. The Tuesday he disappeared, he told his ranch hand he was heading into town for supplies. Never arrived. Next morning his horse came back without him. And the grave? Abigail forced herself to ask. Who would dig an empty grave? Something dark passed across the marshal's face. Someone sending a message, perhaps, or preparing for a body they intended to fill it with. A chill ran through her, despite the warm coffee in her hands. Why are you telling me all this, Marshal? He studied her for a long moment. Because you have 2 young boys who depend on you, Mrs. Harlow. Because you came here expecting one thing and found another. And because if Theo was involved in something dangerous, that danger might not have died with him. He paused. If he is dead, you think he could still be alive? A flicker of hope, quickly tempered by reason. I think, he said carefully, that things in Pinecrest aren't always what they seem. And until we know exactly what happened to Theodore Weston, you and your boys should be cautious about who you trust, including you, Marshal Blackwood. The question slipped out before she could stop it. That almost smile touched his lips again. Especially me, Mrs. Harlow. He rose, indicating their conversation was drawing to a close. The town meetings at noon. Mayor Porter will want to address your situation. In the meantime, I'd suggest you wait before making any decisions about returning east. Abigail stood, squaring her shoulders. I have no intention of returning east, Marshal. We've spent everything to get here. Whatever Pinecrest Junction holds for us, this is where we'll make our stand. Something like approval flickered in his eyes. Then you're braver than most, Mrs. Harlow. He reached for his hat. I'm heading out to Weston's ranch today. There's something I want to check again. You're welcome to come along. Might give you a better sense of the man you came to marry. The offer surprised her. My sons. Bring them, he said simply. Boys should see the country they're going to grow up in. She considered for a moment, then nodded. We'll be ready in an hour. The sun was climbing higher as Abigail returned to the boarding house, her mind whirling with new questions. Theodore's mysterious business, the empty grave, Marshal Blackwood's warnings. She had come seeking security and found only uncertainty. The twins were awake and restless when she returned, full of questions about their new home, about the mysterious Mr. Weston, about when they could see the ranch with real horses. She answered as honestly as she could without frightening them, explaining that they would be taking a ride with Marshal Blackwood that very morning. Is he a real sheriff? Ethan asked, eyes wide with excitement. Does he shoot bad guys with his one arm? He's a marshal, she corrected gently, and I'm sure he prefers to catch wrongdoers without shooting them. She helped them wash and dress, combing their unruly dark hair into some semblance of order. Now remember your manners. The marshal is doing us a kindness by taking us to see Mr. Weston's ranch. Martha provided them with a basket of food for the journey, fresh bread, cheese and apples, and offered more warnings about the difficult trail. But Abigail sensed the older woman's approval of their expedition, and perhaps of the marshal's involvement in their affairs. Blackwood was waiting outside with a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. He wore a duster over his usual attire, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. The twins hesitated at the sight of him, their earlier bravado fading in the presence of his imposing figure. These are fine-looking boys, Mrs. Harlow, he said, tipping his hat to them. Strong enough to help me drive the wagon, I'd wager. The simple words broke the tension. Caleb and Ethan scrambled forward, suddenly eager to climb aboard and take their positions on the bench seat. Abigail accepted Blackwood's assistance into the wagon, noticing the strength in his single hand as he helped her up. As they pulled away from Pinecrest Junction, the mountains loomed larger against the sky. The twins peppered Blackwood with questions about animals, Indians, outlaws, and his missing arm. To her surprise, he answered with patience occasionally, sharing a glance with Abigail that held something like amusement. Lost it at Gettysburg, he told them when they finally worked up the courage to ask directly about his arm. Confederate artillery shell made quite a mess. Did it hurt terrible? Caleb asked, eyes wide. Some, Blackwood admitted, but it taught me something important. What? Both boys asked in unison. That what makes a man isn't what he has, but what he does with what's left. He flicked the reins, urging the horses up a steeper section of the trail. Your father, was he a soldier too? The question was directed at Abigail, but Ethan answered first. Papa worked in the factory with the big machines. He got sick from the dust inside him. Textile mill, Abigail clarified softly. Cotton fibers in the lungs. It happens to many of the workers eventually. Blackwood nodded, understanding in his eyes. Hard way to go. It was. She didn't elaborate on the 3 years of watching her husband slowly suffocate, of working double shifts to afford medicine that barely eased his suffering, of eventually selling their wedding silver to pay for a decent burial. The marshal seemed to read some of this in her face. Theo would have made a good father to them, he said quietly, while the boys were distracted by a hawk circling overhead. That much I know. The trail widened as they crested a rise, and suddenly the valley opened before them. Nestled against the shelter of a pine forest stood a modest cabin with several outbuildings. A corral held 3 horses, and beyond that, a small herd of cattle grazed in a meadow that stretched toward a creek lined with cottonwoods. Weston's place, Blackwood announced. Not the biggest spread in the territory, but solid. Good water, decent grazing. It's beautiful, Abigail breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. This was what she had imagined during those long nights. Reading Theodore's letters, this tranquil valley, this promise of space and fresh air for her boys. The twins were practically bouncing with excitement. Can we see the horses? Can we? Please, Mama. Let's see the house first, she said, her gaze drawn to the cabin that would have been her home. Blackwood helped them down from the wagon and led them toward the cabin. A ranch hand emerged from one of the outbuildings, a weathered older man who introduced himself as Hank. Been keeping things running, Marshal, he reported. Cattle are fine, no trouble. Any visitors? Blackwood asked. Just that fella from the bank yesterday, Caldwell, asking when the place would be put up for sale. Hank's rheumy eyes settled on Abigail and the twins with curiosity. This is Mrs. Harlow, Blackwood explained. Theo's intended. She arrived yesterday with her sons. Understanding dawned on the old man's face. Ma'am, he said, removing his hat. Terrible sorry about Mr. Weston. He was right excited about you coming. Fixed up the house special. Thank you, Mr. Hank, she replied, swallowing the lump in her throat. May we see inside? The cabin was simple but carefully constructed, with 2 rooms and a loft area above. The main room held a table with 4 chairs, a stone fireplace, and shelves filled with books, more books than Abigail had expected to find in a frontier home. A rocking chair sat by the window with a small table beside it holding a kerosene lamp. But what caught her eye was the second room. Theodore had built 2 small beds, their frames sanded smooth and stained a rich brown. A chest at the foot of each held children's clothing, shirts, trousers, and even 2 pairs of sturdy boots. He made all this for us, she whispered, touching the quilt that covered one bed. Last 3 months he worked on it, Hank confirmed from the doorway. Said he wanted everything perfect for his new family. The twins were exploring with delight, opening drawers, climbing the ladder to the loft, exclaiming over every discovery. Their excitement only deepened Abigail's confusion. Theodore Weston had clearly been sincere in his desire for a family. How could such a man simply vanish? What business dealings could have led to an empty grave on his property? While the boys continued their exploration under Hank's watchful eye, Blackwood drew Abigail outside. "I need to show you something," he said quietly, leading her around the cabin to a stand of pines about 50 yards away. The grave was there, though she would have missed it without guidance. The earth had been returned after being disturbed, but the rectangular outline was unmistakable. Someone had placed a simple wooden cross at the head with no name or date. "Who found it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I did," Blackwood replied. "When Theo didn't come into town as expected, I rode out to check on him. Hank was away, visiting his sister in Helena. The place was empty, but someone had been here. Things moved around. Then I spotted the freshly turned earth." "You opened it yourself?" He nodded, his jaw tight. "Had to know." "And there was nothing inside?" "No. Clues. Just an empty hole, 6 feet deep, sized for a man." He surveyed the surrounding trees. "Whoever dug it didn't want it found right away. Chose a spot hidden from the house." Abigail shivered despite the warm day. "Who would do such a thing? That's what I aim to find out." Blackwood's voice hardened. "And why they targeted Theo specifically." She studied his face, seeing beyond the stoic exterior to the genuine concern beneath. "You were friends." "Since I came to the Territory," he acknowledged. "Both of us looking for a fresh start after the war." A shadow crossed his features. "I should have seen the signs earlier, known something was wrong. Perhaps he didn't want you to know," she suggested gently. "If he was involved in something he wasn't proud of." Blackwood's eyes met hers, searching. "You're a perceptive woman, Mrs. Harlow." "Abigail," she said, "if we're to work together to solve this mystery, you might as well use my given name." A hint of surprise crossed his face. "You intend to help investigate?" "Theodore Weston promised my sons a home," she said firmly. "He promised me a future. If someone has taken that from us, I want to know why." She glanced back toward the cabin. "And looking at what he built here, what he prepared for us, I believe I owe him that much at least." For the first time, Blackwood's stern expression gave way to something like respect. "Silas," he offered in return, "though most folks just call me Marshall." Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Then the twins' excited voices broke the spell as they came running around the cabin, full of discoveries and questions about when they could move in. The reality of their situation came crashing back. This beautiful homestead might never be theirs. Theodore Weston might never return. And somewhere in Pinecrest Junction, someone had dug a grave meant as a warning or a promise. As they prepared to return to town for the noon meeting, Abigail cast one last look at the peaceful valley. Whatever had happened to Theodore Weston, whatever dangers still lurked, she knew one thing with certainty. She would fight for this place her sons already loved. And in Marshal Silas Blackwood, with his missing arm and watchful eyes, she sensed she had found an unexpected ally in that fight. The wagon rolled back toward Pinecrest Junction, carrying them away from the ranch, but not from the questions that now seemed to multiply with each passing mile. The town hall of Pinecrest Junction was little more than a converted church basement, with rough-hewn benches arranged in rows, facing a simple podium. By noon, it had filled with townsfolk, their curious gazes following Abigail and the twins. As Marshal Blackwood escorted them to seats near the front, the room smelled of damp wood and coal oil from the lanterns that supplemented the meager light from narrow windows. Mayor Elijah Porter was a corpulent man with mutton chop whiskers and a voice that carried to the rafters without effort. He rapped a gavel on the podium, bringing the murmurs of conversation to a halt. "Folks, as you're all aware, we've got ourselves a situation," he began without preamble. "Mrs. Abigail Harlow and her sons have traveled all the way from Pennsylvania, at Theodore Weston's invitation, only to find him missing under suspicious circumstances." Abigail kept her back straight and her gaze steady as heads turned toward her. The twins pressed against her sides, unaccustomed to being the center of such attention. Now, Pinecrest has always prided itself on taking care of its own, Porter continued. And while Mrs. Harlow may be new among us, she came here in good faith. I propose we extend the same courtesy to her until this matter is resolved. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, though Abigail noticed a few dissenters, most notably a well-dressed man near the back whose thin lips were pressed into a disapproving line. Marshal Blackwood, any progress on locating Weston? The mayor asked. Silas stood, his presence commanding immediate attention. Nothing conclusive. The investigation continues. In the meantime, Mrs. Harlow needs arrangements for lodging and income if she's to support her boys. She can stay at my boarding house, Martha Sullivan offered immediately. No charge for the first 2 weeks. Very generous, Porter nodded. And employment? An uncomfortable silence fell. Abigail felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her shoulders. Then Dr. Isaiah Montgomery cleared his throat from his position near the wall. My nurse left last month to marry that blacksmith. Over in Helena, he said. I could use someone with steady hands and a quick mind. Mrs. Harlow, do you have any experience with medical matters? Abigail rose slowly. I nursed my husband through 3 years of consumption, doctor. And before that, I assisted our neighborhood midwife in Philadelphia. I'm not formally trained, but I'm not squeamish, and I learn quickly. The doctor's eyes brightened with interest. That'll do for a start. 3 days a week at the clinic, reasonable hours. The boys can attend school when it's in session. Relief flooded through her. It wasn't the future she'd planned, but it was a beginning. Thank you, doctor. I accept gratefully. That settles the immediate concerns, Porter said, looking pleased with the quick resolution. Now, as to Weston's property, if I may, Mayor, the well-dressed man at the back interrupted, rising to his feet. Victor Caldwell, representing Frontier Banking and Land Trust. Abigail felt Blackwood stiffen beside her. As Mr. Weston's mortgage holder, we have certain rights regarding his property should he default, Caldwell continued smoothly. Given his extended absence without notification, the bank is within its rights to begin foreclosure proceedings. A ripple of displeasure moved through the crowd. Hank, Weston's ranch hand who had accompanied them back to town, stood up from his seat. Near the door. That ranch is paid for, the old man protested. CO made the final payment 3 months ago, made a point of telling me so. Caldwell's smile remained fixed. I'm afraid our records show otherwise, Mr. Hank. While Mr. Weston did make a significant payment, there remains a balance of nearly $500. Without regular payments, the property will revert to the bank within 30 days. Blackwood's voice cut through the rising murmurs. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say, Caldwell? Theo disappears, and suddenly there's a mortgage no one knew about. The banker's eyes narrowed slightly. Careful, Marshal. Even with that badge, accusations of financial impropriety are serious matters. It wasn't an accusation, Blackwood replied evenly. Just an observation. Mayor Porter cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps this matter requires further investigation before any decisions are made. For now, Hank will continue managing the ranch operations, with any proceeds held in trust pending resolution of Mr. Weston's status. The bank will expect documentation of all transactions, Caldwell stipulated, his gaze sliding to Abigail. And Mrs. Harlow should understand she has no legal claim to Weston's property, regardless of their arrangement. Without a marriage certificate, she remains merely a disappointed visitor. The deliberate cruelty in his tone sent a flush of anger to Abigail's cheeks. Before she could respond, Caleb stood up beside her, his small chin lifted defiantly. Mr. Weston promised us a home, he declared in his clear child's voice. He said so in his letters. He made beds for me and Ethan and everything." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the gathering. Caldwell's smile tightened at the corners. "How touching," he said coldly. But promises in letters don't constitute legal contracts, young man. The sooner your mother accepts that, the better for all concerned." Abigail placed a steadying hand on Caleb's shoulder, drawing him back to her side. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room, "I was raised to believe that a person's word has value, whether written in legal language or not. Theodore Weston gave his word. If you knew him as these people did, you'd understand that means something, even if there's no paper to prove it." Several people nodded in agreement. Caldwell's expression hardened. "Sentiment doesn't pay debts, Mrs. Harlow. Good day." With a curt nod to the mayor, he exited the hall, leaving a wake of uncomfortable silence behind him. Porter rapped his gavel again. "Well then, we'll reconvene when there are new developments. In the meantime, welcome to Pinecrest Junction. Mrs. Harlow, we trust you'll find our community supportive in your time of need." As the meeting dispersed, Abigail remained seated, the twins fidgeting beside her. Blackwood lingered nearby, his expression thoughtful as he watched Caldwell through the window, mounting an expensive-looking bay horse outside. "That man," Abigail said quietly, "doesn't strike me as someone who cares about mortgage payments." "Victor Caldwell cares about power," Blackwood replied. "Land, control. He's been trying to consolidate holdings in this valley for the past 2 years. Theo's ranch sits on the best water source for miles. You think Theodore's disappearance and Caldwell's sudden claim are connected?" The marshal's blue eyes met hers. "I think coincidences are rare in my line of work." Dr. Montgomery approached then, introducing himself properly and suggesting Abigail come to the clinic the following morning to familiarize herself with his practice. He was a gentle-mannered man in his 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Your sons are welcome to accompany you," he added. "There's a small room off the examination area where they can read or play quietly." "Thank you, Doctor," she replied sincerely. "We'll be there at 8. As the last of the townspeople trickled out, Blackwood touched her elbow lightly. "I need to make some inquiries about Theo's financial dealings. Would you and the boys care to join me for supper at Meredith's place later? The Rusty Spur serves the best beefsteak in the territory." The invitation surprised her. "Is that appropriate, Marshal?" A hint of amusement crossed his face. "In a town this size, Mrs. Harlow, propriety takes different forms. Besides, it's the only place to get a decent meal that you don't cook yourself." She considered the offer, aware of the twins' hopeful expressions. After the tension of the meeting, perhaps a meal in public would help establish their place in the community. "Very well. What time shall we meet you?" 6 o'clock. The boys might enjoy meeting Meredith's parrot. Foul-mouthed creature, but it knows some impressive tricks. The prospect of a talking bird instantly captured the twins' imagination, and they peppered Blackwood with questions about the parrot all the way back to Martha Sullivan's boarding house. After they had departed, Martha handed Abigail a bundle of fabric. "Curtains for the room," she explained. "Thought you might want to make the place feel more like home, since you'll be staying a while." The simple kindness brought unexpected tears to Abigail's eyes. "That's very thoughtful." Martha patted her arm. "This town may not be much to look at, but we take care of each other. You stood your ground with Caldwell. That'll count for something with most folks here." "He seems influential." "Money usually is," Martha replied with a shrug, "but Silas Blackwood isn't easily intimidated, and neither, I suspect, are you." She smiled knowingly. "The Marshal doesn't invite many people to dine with him. In fact, I can't recall the last time he extended such an invitation to a woman." Abigail felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "It's merely a practical arrangement. The boys were curious about the parrot." "Of course," Martha agreed, not bothering to hide her skepticism. Well, there's hot water for washing up, and I've laid out my second-best dress for you to wear. We're of a similar size, though you're a sight more slender than me. I couldn't possibly. You can, and you will, Martha insisted. First impressions matter in a small town. You've made a good start, but a fresh dress for your first proper evening out will cement it. The twins were scrubbed and combed to shining by 6 o'clock, their excitement about the parrot having sustained them through the afternoon. Abigail wore Martha's loaned dress, a plum-colored cotton with a modestly scooped neckline and lace at the cuffs. It fit surprisingly well, with only minor adjustments. The Rusty Spur Saloon was the largest establishment on Pinecrest's main street, its weathered facade brightened by actual glass windows and a freshly painted sign. Despite its function as the town's primary drinking establishment, it maintained a respectable dining room separate from the bar area. Marshal Blackwood awaited them outside, and Abigail couldn't help noticing he'd exchanged his usual attire for a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing. He guided them into the dining room, where several tables were already occupied by townsfolk who nodded in greeting. Silas Blackwood with dinner guests. A tall woman with flaming red hair twisted into an elaborate knot swept toward them. The world truly is full of wonders. Meredith, he acknowledged with a nod. This is Mrs. Harlow and her sons, Caleb and Ethan. Meredith Flynn had the robust build of a woman who enjoyed her own cooking and the shrewd eyes of someone who missed nothing. The Eastern bride, she said, surveying Abigail with frank curiosity. Martha told me about your situation. Welcome to my establishment. First meals on the house. We've got a tradition of hospitality to maintain. Before Abigail could protest, the twins spotted the parrot in its elaborate brass cage near the bar entrance. The bird was a riot of blue and yellow feathers, its black eyes glittering with intelligence as it watched the newcomers. Can we see it? Ethan pleaded. Please! Meredith laughed. Go ahead, but mind your fingers. Caesar has a temper when he's in a mood. While the boys approached the cage with appropriate caution, Meredith led Abigail and Blackwood to a corner table with a good view of both the dining room and the street outside. Best spot in the house, she declared. I'll send out my special roast beef with all the trimmings. After she departed to check on the boys, Abigail found herself suddenly aware of being alone with Blackwood in a public setting. Despite his rough exterior, he displayed surprisingly refined manners, holding her chair and waiting for her to be seated before taking his own place. Thank you for inviting us, she said, smoothing her napkin across her lap. The boys needed something to lift their spirits after today's meeting. They handled themselves well, he replied. Especially young Caleb, standing up to Caldwell. Like that takes courage. Pride warmed her chest. They've had to grow up quickly since their father died. I worry sometimes that they've missed parts of childhood they should have had. Children are resilient, Blackwood said, watching as the twins giggled at something the parrot had squawked. More so than adults sometimes. Is that why you became a lawman after the war? Resilience? His gaze returned to her, assessing. Partly. Needed something that made sense when the world didn't anymore. He rotated his cup on the table with his left hand. Hard to go back to farming when you can't properly hold a plow. The matter-of-fact statement held no self-pity, but Abigail sensed the years of adjustment behind it. Yet, you found a new purpose. A badge doesn't care how many arms you have, just how you use what you've got. He smiled faintly. What about you? What would you have done if Theo had been waiting as planned? Been a good wife, she answered simply. Made a home for my sons, helped with the ranch. And now? She considered the question carefully. Now, I suppose I'll be Dr. Montgomery's nurse and Martha Sullivan's boarder until I can find a more permanent arrangement. And if Theo never returns? The question hung between them, unavoidable. Then I'll make my own way, she said with quiet determination. I've done it before. Appreciation flickered in his eyes. Before he could respond, Meredith returned, with heaping plates of food, and the twins scrambled back to the table, full of excited tales about Caesar the parrot and his remarkable vocabulary. The meal passed pleasantly, with Blackwood surprising Abigail by drawing the usually reserved Ethan into a conversation about horses, and Caleb entertaining them with an animated recounting of their stagecoach journey west. Around them, the dining room filled with townspeople, many stopping by their table to introduce themselves to Abigail and welcome her to Pinecrest. It was during dessert, apple pie with fresh cream, that the atmosphere in the saloon abruptly changed. A hush fell over the room, and Abigail turned to see Victor Caldwell entering with two men she didn't recognize. The banker's cold gaze swept the dining room before landing on their table, his lips curling slightly at the sight of her dining with the marshal. "Looks like trouble," Blackwood murmured, setting down his fork. Caldwell approached their table with measured steps, his companions hanging back near the entrance. "Marshal, Mrs. Harlow, how domestic." "Evening, Caldwell," Blackwood replied evenly. "Something I can help you with?" "Just a friendly warning." The banker's gaze shifted to the twins, who had gone quiet. "I've sent word to Helena about Weston's property. The Territorial bank examiner will be arriving within the week to review the situation." "The situation being a man who's missing and a mortgage that suddenly appeared," Blackwood observed. Caldwell's expression hardened. "The situation being a defaulted loan and squatters trying to claim property they have no right to." Abigail felt her cheeks burn. "My sons and I have made no claim to Theodore's ranch, Mr. Caldwell. We're merely seeking answers about his disappearance." "A noble sentiment," he replied with mock sincerity, "but ultimately futile. Weston ran afoul of powerful interests. The smart play would be to take whatever charity this town offers and return east before winter sets in." His gaze sharpened. "Montana can be unforgiving to the unprepared." The threat beneath his words was unmistakable. Blackwood stood slowly, his height allowing him to look down at the banker, despite having only one arm. "Sounds remarkably like a threat, Caldwell." "Merely practical advice," the banker replied smoothly. "For a woman clearly out of her depth." He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Good evening." As he turned to leave, Ethan's small voice piped up unexpectedly. "What did you do to Mr. Weston?" Caldwell froze, then turned back slowly. "What did you say, boy?" Ethan shrank back against Abigail, but Caleb stepped into the breach. "My brother asked what you did to Mr. Weston. You talk like you know what happened to him." A tense silence fell over the dining room. Abigail placed protective hands on her son's shoulders, but she didn't contradict them. The same thought had occurred to her. Caldwell's face flushed with either anger or something more telling. "Children should be seen and not heard," he said, coldly. "Another Eastern custom your mother has failed to instill." "I find my son's observations quite astute," Abigail replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You do seem unusually interested in a property that, by all accounts, was nearly paid off, and unusually certain of Theodore's fate." Whispers rippled through the onlooking diners. Caldwell's companions shifted uneasily near the door. The banker himself seemed momentarily at a loss for words, an occurrence Abigail suspected was rare. "Marshal," he finally said, voice tight, "you do well to remind your dinner companions. That slander has consequences, even in a backwater like Pinecrest." "Not slander if it's a question," Blackwood replied mildly. "And not a backwater, just a place where folks notice things." He gestured toward the door. "You've delivered your message. Enjoy your evening." For a moment it seemed Caldwell might say more, Instead, he turned on his heel and strode out, his companions following close behind. The room remained silent for several heartbeats after their departure. Then Meredith Flynn broke the tension with a loud laugh. "Well, never thought I'd see Victor Caldwell speechless. That's worth the price of your meals right there." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the room, and conversations gradually resumed. Blackwood sat back down, his expression thoughtful, as he studied Abigail across the table. "You realize you've just made an enemy," he said quietly. "I suspect that happened the moment I arrived in Pinecrest," she replied. "Men like Caldwell don't like complications to their plans." She glanced at the twins who were finishing their pie with renewed appetite now that the confrontation had passed. "But I won't have my sons intimidated, nor will I skulk away when Theodore is still missing." "No," Blackwood agreed, a hint of admiration in his voice. "I don't imagine you will." The remainder of the evening passed without incident, though Abigail was acutely aware of the speculative glances cast their way by the other diners. When they finally rose to leave, Blackwood insisted on escorting them back to the boarding house. The night air had cooled considerably, and the twins walked ahead, their energy seemingly inexhaustible as they chattered about Caesar the parrot and the excitement of the evening. Blackwood fell into step beside Abigail, his stride measured to match hers. "There's something you should know," he said after they had walked half a block in comfortable silence. "Before Theo disappeared, he left something in my keeping. Said, if anything happened to him, I should use it." Abigail glanced up sharply. "What was it?" "A letter." Blackwood kept his voice low, ensuring the twins couldn't overhear. "And a deed." Her breath caught. "A deed to the ranch?" He nodded. "Made out to you and the boys. Properly witnessed and filed with the Territorial Land Office in Helena. But that's..." She stopped walking, stunned by the implications. "Why wouldn't you mention this at the town meeting, when Caldwell was making his claims?" "Because something's not right," Blackwood replied, guiding her to resume walking with a light touch to her elbow. "Theo never mentioned any outstanding debt to me. Quite the opposite, he was proud of paying off the ranch. And the timing, making out a deed to you, just weeks before he vanished, suggests he suspected something might happen." "You think he was in danger?" she whispered. "That whoever is responsible for his disappearance might target us if they knew about the deed?" "Can't discount the possibility," he admitted. "Which is why I'm telling you privately. The deed exists, and it's legal, but until we know what happened to Theo and why, it might be safer if Caldwell believes you have no claim to the property." Abigail processed this revelation, her mind racing with its implications. "The land is valuable. Strategic," Blackwood clarified, "controls water access to most of the northern valley. Whoever owns it can dictate terms to the surrounding ranches. And you think Caldwell wants it badly enough to..." She couldn't bring herself to finish the thought, aware of her sons just ahead. "I think," Blackwood said carefully, "that men have killed for far less than what that land represents." They had reached the boarding house. The twins bounded up the steps to the porch, then turned back, waiting for their mother to join them. "What do we do now?" Abigail asked, her voice barely audible. "You start your new position with Dr. Montgomery tomorrow," Blackwood replied. "Establish yourselves in town. Let people get to know you." His eyes met hers in the dim light from the boarding house. "Windows, and I keep investigating. Someone knows what happened to Theo, and sooner or later they'll make a mistake." She nodded, understanding the wisdom of this approach. Yet as she gazed up at this one-armed lawman who had unexpectedly become her ally, she couldn't help feeling there was more he wasn't telling her. "Marshal Silas," she corrected herself, the familiar address still strange on her tongue. "Is there something else I should know?" He hesitated, then reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. Theo's letter, the one he left with the deed. "It's addressed to you." She accepted it with trembling fingers, recognizing Theodore's handwriting immediately. "You've read it?" "No," he said simply. "It's sealed. Whatever he wanted to tell you, he meant it for your eyes only." The weight of the envelope seemed disproportionate to its size. Here, perhaps, were answers to the questions that had plagued her since her arrival, yet she was suddenly afraid of what those answers might reveal. "Thank you for dinner," she said, tucking the letter into her pocket, "and for your honesty." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Honesty's about the only thing I can freely offer, Mrs. Harlow." "Abigail," she reminded him gently. "Abigail," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. He tipped his hat and stepped back. "Sleep well. Tomorrow brings a new chapter." As he walked away, his solitary figure cutting a dark silhouette against the starlit street, Abigail felt a curious mixture of apprehension and hope. The future that had seemed so certain in Theodore's letters now stretched before her like uncharted territory, full of hidden dangers and unexpected allies. The twins called to her from the porch, their familiar voices anchoring her to the present moment, to her unchanging role as their protector and guide. Whatever revelations awaited in Theodore's letter, whatever mysteries surrounded his disappearance, her primary duty remained clear. She climbed the steps to join her sons, the envelope a secret weight against her heart. Inside the boarding house, the common room was quiet, most of the other lodgers having retired for the night. Martha looked up from her mending by the fire, her knowing gaze taking in Abigail's thoughtful expression. "Pleasant evening?" she inquired with studied casualness. "Eventful," Abigail replied, ushering the twins toward the stairs. "The boys need to wash up before bed. It's been a long day." "I imagine it has," Martha agreed. "Dr. Montgomery stopped by, said to remind you he expects you at 8 sharp. Left a medical text for you to review if you have time." Abigail nodded, grateful for the practical reminder of her new responsibilities. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." The older woman waved away her gratitude. "This town's been needing some fresh blood and a bit of excitement." She smiled mischievously, though perhaps not quite as much excitement as Victor Caldwell storming out of the rusty spur like his coattails were on fire. News traveled fast in Pinecrest, it seemed. "Mr. Caldwell and I have different perspectives on several matters," Abigail said diplomatically. "So I heard," Martha chuckled. "Good for you, standing your ground. That man's been riding roughshod over this town since he arrived 2 years ago. About time someone called his bluff." Abigail hesitated, then asked, "Did you know Theodore well?" Martha's expression softened. "Well enough. Quiet sort, kept to himself mostly, but honest. When he started writing to you, he'd sometimes ask my advice about what a woman might want to know about life out here." Her eyes twinkled. "Though I suspect the questions were really about what might impress you." The thought of Theodore earnestly seeking advice on how to court her through his letters brought an unexpected ache to Abigail's chest. "He seemed a good man." "He was," Martha confirmed, "which makes his disappearance all the more troubling." She set aside her mending. "Whatever happened, it wasn't of his choosing. That much I'm certain of." Upstairs, Abigail supervised the twins' washing up and nighttime preparations, her mind simultaneously present with their needs and distant with thoughts of Theodore's letter waiting to be read. Once they were settled in their bed, yawning despite protests that they weren't tired, she kissed each forehead and promised stories of the parrot for their grandmother back in Pennsylvania. "When can we go to Mr. Weston's ranch again?" Caleb asked, his voice already heavy with approaching sleep. "Soon," she promised, smoothing his dark hair back from his forehead. "Rest now." When their breathing had deepened into sleep, Abigail retreated to the room's small sitting area and lit the lamp on the side table. The letter felt heavier than ever as she withdrew it from her pocket. Her fingers traced Theodore's handwriting, On the envelope, Mrs. Abigail Harlow, to be delivered in the event of my absence. He had anticipated something happening to him, had prepared for it. The realization sent a chill through her, despite the room's warmth. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper within. My dear Mrs. Harlow, the letter began in Theodore's familiar hand. If you are reading this, then my fears have been realized, and I'm unable to welcome you to Pinecrest as planned. For this, I offer my deepest apologies. Abigail drew a shaky breath and continued reading. I have entrusted Marshal Blackwood with a deed placing my ranch in your name and that of your sons. This is not charity, but recognition of a promise made. You uprooted your life based on my word, and I will not have that sacrifice be in vain, whatever may have befallen me. There are matters I did not disclose in our correspondence, business dealings that I now realize may have placed me in danger. Men in this territory are willing to kill for what lies beneath the soil, and I fear I have discovered something that certain powerful interests would prefer remained hidden. If I am missing when you arrive, do not trust Victor Caldwell. The bank's claims against my property are fabricated. The mortgage was paid in full this past March. Trust Silas Blackwood. Despite his gruff exterior, he is a man of uncompromising honor. He will help you if you allow him to. In the southeast corner of the barn at my ranch, beneath the loose floorboard under the tool rack, you will find a metal box. The contents will explain everything. Retrieve it only when you can do so without being observed. I regret that our acquaintance must begin with such intrigue. Know that every word I wrote to you about my desires for a family was sincere. Your boys sound remarkable, and I had looked forward to watching them grow into men. With deepest regret and sincere apology, Theodore Weston. Abigail let the letter fall to her lap, her mind reeling with its implications. Theodore had known he was in danger, had prepared for his possible disappearance or death, and he had left her not just his property, but also a mystery, a metal box hidden beneath his barn floor that might contain answers to his fate. She refolded the letter carefully and tucked it back into its envelope. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the window frame and carrying with it the distant howl of a coyote. Tomorrow she would begin her new position with Dr. Montgomery, taking the first step toward establishing a life in Pinecrest. But now she had another purpose, uncovering what had happened to the man who had brought her here and why someone might have wanted him to disappear. Sleep would not come easily tonight, not with Theodore's words echoing in her mind and the knowledge that somewhere in this town, perhaps watching her even now, was someone who might be responsible for his fate. Someone who might see her and her sons as the next obstacle to be removed. She blew out the lamp and moved to the window, gazing out at the darkened street below. A single figure stood in the shadows across the way, too tall to be anyone but Silas Blackwood. He had lingered, watching over the boarding house, watching over them. Trust Silas Blackwood, Theodore had written. Despite everything, Abigail found that she already did. Dr. Montgomery's clinic occupied the ground floor of a modest two-story building on the edge of Pinecrest's main street. Morning sunlight streamed through clean windows, illuminating shelves, lined with glass bottles of medicine and neatly labeled jars of herbs and powders. The examination room was simple but spotless, with a table covered in clean white sheeting and a cabinet of gleaming instruments. Sanitation is my religion, Mrs. Harlow, Dr. Montgomery explained as he guided Abigail through the space. I served as a field surgeon during the late war. Saw too many men die from infection rather than their wounds. He adjusted his spectacles, peering at her over the rims. I understand you nursed your husband through consumption. That requires fortitude. And patience, she acknowledged, taking in her new workplace with appreciation for its order. He suffered greatly toward the end. The doctor nodded, his expression softening with professional empathy. The boys seemed to have escaped the illness. They were fortunate. I kept them away as much as possible during the worst periods. A pang of guilt accompanied the memory of those difficult choices, balancing her husband's needs against protecting her sons from both contagion and the sight of their father's deterioration. Montgomery seemed to read some of this in her face. "You made the right decision," he said quietly. "I've seen too many families devastated when the disease spreads from one member to all." The twins were settled in the small adjacent room Montgomery had mentioned, provided with slates and chalk to occupy themselves. Through the partially open door, Abigail could hear Ethan explaining something to his brother, his voice earnest and focused. "I'll teach you the organization of my supplies. First," Montgomery continued, moving toward the cabinets. "Then the preparation of common tinctures and poultices. Most of our work here is routine. Fevers, broken bones, births, the occasional mining accident. Nothing like what you'd see in a city hospital." "I'm grateful for that," she replied honestly. "The simplicity is welcome after." She paused, uncertain how to characterize the upheaval of the past days. "After discovering your intended groom missing and his grave empty?" Montgomery supplied with surprising bluntness. "Yes, I imagine routine would be a comfort after that." Abigail studied the doctor more carefully. Beneath his professional demeanor lay a directness she hadn't expected. "You knew Theodore well." Montgomery arranged several bottles in a neat row before answering. "I knew him as a patient. Treated him for a badly infected cut about a year ago. Barbed wire can be vicious when it catches you right. During his recovery, we had several conversations about his hopes for the future." He glanced at her. He mentioned his advertisement for a wife even then, though he hadn't yet received any replies that interested him. "What changed his mind about me, I wonder?" she mused aloud. "Your letter, I'd imagine," Montgomery replied. "He showed it to me once, said it had more genuine feeling and less artifice than all the others combined." He smiled slightly. Theo valued authenticity above most qualities. Before Abigail could respond, the clinic door opened, admitting a harried-looking woman with a young girl whose arm was wrapped in a bloodied cloth. "Dr. Montgomery!" Emily caught her arm on a nail in the barn. "It's gone deep." The doctor switched instantly to his professional mode. "Mrs. Harlow, would you prepare the examination table? Mrs. Peterson, bring Emily right through." The morning passed in a flurry of activity. After Emily Peterson's arm was stitched and bandaged, there came a ranch hand with a dislocated shoulder, followed by an elderly man suffering from rheumatism and a young pregnant woman seeking advice about persistent morning sickness. Through it all, Abigail found herself falling naturally into the rhythm of assisting, preparing patients, handing instruments, mixing remedies under Montgomery's guidance, and offering comforting words when needed. The twins proved unexpectedly helpful, fetching clean water and bandages when asked, watching the medical procedures with fascination rather than fear. By noon, when Montgomery closed the clinic for his midday meal, Abigail felt a satisfaction she hadn't experienced in months. Here was work that mattered, work she could do well. "You have a natural aptitude," Montgomery observed as they tidied. "The examination room. Had you considered nursing before?" "Not professionally," she admitted. "It wasn't a path available to me in Philadelphia, but I've always found satisfaction in caring for others." "Well, you've exceeded my expectations already." He removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. "I'd like to increase your hours if you're amenable. 4 days a week instead of 3. The compensation would adjust accordingly." The offer was unexpected but welcome. "That would be most helpful, Doctor. Thank you." He nodded, then hesitated before adding, "A word of advice, if I may. The situation with Weston's property, it's likely to become complicated. Victor Caldwell rarely loses when he sets his sights on something." Abigail tensed. You believe his claims about the mortgage? Montgomery replaced his glasses. I believe Caldwell is capable of manufacturing whatever documentation serves his purposes. The Territorial bank examiners are often in his pocket. He sighed. Theo was not just my patient, but my friend, Mrs. Harlow. If there's anything I can do to help uncover what happened to him, you need only ask. She studied him, weighing Theodore's advice about trust against her instincts. Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate that. As they prepared to leave for the midday break, Caleb approached, his expression serious. Mama, there's a man watching the clinic. Abigail tensed. What man, darling? Tall man with a fancy hat. He's across the street by the barber shop. She moved to the window, careful to stay partially concealed by the curtain. Sure enough, a tall figure in a black coat and flat-brimmed hat stood in the shadow of the barber's awning, his attention fixed on the clinic entrance. One of Caldwell's men, Montgomery murmured, joining her at the window. He's had his people watching me ever since I spoke against his mining interests at the last town council. Mining? Abigail turned to him, recalling Theodore's letter. Men in this territory are willing to kill for what lies beneath the soil. The doctor's expression became guarded. Primarily copper and silver. Caldwell represents investors who believe this valley holds significant deposits. Several smaller operations have already begun in the surrounding hills. And Theodore's. And strategically located, Montgomery confirmed. Not just for the water rights Blackwood mentioned, but because geological surveys suggest the richest veins might run beneath that section of the valley. Understanding dawned. That's why the ranch is so valuable to him. Not for cattle or crops, but for what might lie beneath. Precisely, though proving mineral rights can be complicated when the surface property belongs to someone else. He gave her a meaningful look, especially if that someone is disinclined to sell or lease those rights. Before Abigail could respond, the clinic door opened again to admit Marshal Blackwood. His gaze swept the room, taking in their positions, at the window and the twins' curious expressions. Afternoon, he greeted them, removing his hat. Thought I might escort Mrs. Harlow and the boys to lunch at Martha's. Noticed you have an admirer across the street. We were just discussing that, Montgomery replied. Caldwell seems to be taking an interest in Mrs. Harlow's movements. Blackwood's expression hardened slightly. Been that way since dawn. Different men, same purpose. He turned to Abigail. I'd like a word with you, privately, if possible. Montgomery nodded in understanding. Take my back office. I'll watch the boys for a few minutes. The doctor's private office was a small room dominated by a desk covered in medical journals and patient records. A window overlooked a narrow alley behind the clinic, providing a discreet exit if needed. Blackwood closed the door and turned to face her, his manner suddenly more urgent than she'd seen before. I received a wire from Helena this morning, he said without preamble. A body was found in the mountains near the old silver mine. Male, approximately Theo's age and build. Abigail's heart constricted. Is it? Can't be certain yet. The remains were not in good condition. His voice remained steady, but she saw the tension in his jaw. I'm riding out this afternoon to identify them if possible. I should go with you, she said immediately. He shook his head. Not advisable. The journey is rough, and the sight won't be pleasant. Besides, you're needed here with your boys. She wanted to argue, but recognized the wisdom in his words. When will you return? Tomorrow, most likely. He hesitated, then added, Abigail, did Theo mention anything to you in his letters about mining interests or mineral surveys on his land? No, she replied truthfully, but I received information last night that may be relevant. She withdrew Theodore's letter from her pocket and handed it to Blackwood. He read it quickly, his expression growing more grave with each line. "A metal box beneath the barn floor," he murmured. "Any idea what it might contain?" "None, but Dr. Montgomery just confirmed that Caldwell's interest in the ranch may be related to potential mineral deposits." She reclaimed the letter, folding it carefully. "I need to retrieve that box. It's too dangerous," Blackwood said immediately. "Caldwell has men watching the ranch. Hank reported 2 riders circling the property yesterday. Then we'll need a distraction," she replied, surprising herself with her own boldness. "Something to draw their attention elsewhere while I search the barn." Blackwood's eyebrows rose. You said yourself I shouldn't go alone." She met his gaze steadily. "And I trust you, Silas, as Theodore did." The use of his given name seemed to settle something between them. He nodded slowly. "After I return from Helena, if the body isn't Theo's, we'll have more time to plan. If it is—" He didn't finish the thought. "Then I'll have more reason than ever to discover what's in that box," she completed for him. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Dr. Montgomery entered, looking apologetic. "Marshal, you might want to step outside. Caldwell's man has been joined by Caldwell himself. They appear to be waiting for Mrs. Harlow." Blackwood's expression darkened. "Stay here," he instructed Abigail. "I'll see what they want." "No," she countered firmly. "If they're looking for me, hiding will only make them more suspicious. We'll all go together." She straightened her shoulders. "I won't cower from Victor Caldwell." The marshal studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, but stay close and let me do the talking." They emerged from the clinic into the bright afternoon sunlight. Sure enough, Victor Caldwell stood. Across the street, flanked by 2 men whose hands rested too casually near their holstered pistols. At the sight of Abigail with Blackwood and Montgomery, Caldwell crossed the dusty road, his polished boots gleaming in stark contrast to the frontier. "Town surrounding him." "Mrs. Harlow," he greeted her with cold politeness. "I see you've wasted no time establishing connections in our little community." "Dr. Montgomery has kindly offered me employment," she replied evenly. "A practical necessity for a woman supporting 2 children." Caldwell's gaze shifted to the twins, who stood protectively close to their mother. "Yes, I suppose it would be. Though I wonder if nursing is the best use of your particular talents." The insinuation in his tone made her skin crawl, but she maintained her composure. "I find the work both meaningful and well-suited to my abilities." "Of course." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I actually came to extend an olive branch. The bank's position regarding Weston's property remains unchanged, but I recognize your situation is difficult. I'm prepared to offer you a small stipend. Call it a compassionate consideration to ease your transition either here in Pinecrest or back east." Blackwood stepped forward slightly. "Sounds remarkably like a bribe, Caldwell." "On the contrary, Marshal, it's a gesture of community support for a woman who finds herself in unfortunate circumstances through no fault of her own." Caldwell withdrew an envelope from his coat. $500, Mrs. Harlow, no strings attached. The exact amount of the supposed remaining mortgage on Theodore's ranch. The coincidence was too perfect to be accidental. Abigail regarded the envelope without reaching for it. "That's very generous, Mr. Caldwell. May I ask what prompted this sudden benevolence?" His smile tightened fractionally. "Let's just say I recognize the difficulty of your position. A widow with 2 young sons, far from home, pinning your hopes on a man who has abandoned his responsibilities." "Theodore Weston did not abandon anything," she interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. "He disappeared under circumstances that remain unexplained. I find it curious that you seem so certain he left voluntarily." Caldwell's expression hardened. "The facts speak for themselves, Mrs. Harlow. Weston's obligations went unpaid, his property stands empty, and you He gestured dismissively, are left to fend for yourself in a town that can barely support its existing population. Yet, here I stand, she replied, employed, housed, and surrounded by people who have shown nothing but kindness. I see no need for your charity, Mr. Caldwell. The banker's face flushed with anger. You're making a mistake. $500 would provide passage back east for you and your sons, with enough remaining to establish yourselves comfortably. I suggest you reconsider. Your concern is noted, she said, her tone cooling further. But my sons and I will remain in Pinecrest for the foreseeable future. Caldwell's composure slipped, revealing a flash of something dangerous beneath his polished exterior. This territory is no place for a woman alone, Mrs. Harlow. Accidents happen. Illness strikes. Children wander off. He thrust the envelope toward her. Take the money for their sake, if not your own. Blackwood stepped between them, his hand moving to rest casually on his holstered pistol. That sounds remarkably like another threat, Caldwell. Care to clarify your meaning? The banker's gaze shifted to the marshal, calculation replacing anger. Merely stating facts about frontier life, Marshal, no threat intended. He pocketed the envelope smoothly. My offer remains open, Mrs. Harlow. When you've had time to consider the realities of your situation, you know where to find me. With a curt nod, he turned and strode away, his men falling into step behind him. Abigail released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He's growing desperate, Montgomery observed quietly. That's a significant sum to offer with no strings attached. It's the exact amount he claims is owed on the mortgage, Blackwood noted, which suggests two possibilities. Either he's trying to establish the legitimacy of the debt by having you acknowledge it, or there's something far more valuable at stake, Abigail finished, thinking of the hidden metal box Theodore had mentioned. Something worth much more than $500. Montgomery checked his pocket watch. You should take the boys to Martha's for lunch. I'll stay at the clinic in case we have emergency patients. He hesitated, then added, Be careful, Mrs. Harlow. Caldwell doesn't make idle threats. As the doctor returned to his clinic, Blackwood guided Abigail and the twins toward the boarding house, his gaze constantly scanning the street and rooftops. I don't like leaving you with Caldwell circling, he said in a low voice. Not with me heading to Helena this afternoon. We'll be fine, she assured him, though the banker's veiled threats had unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Martha's boarding house is secure, and we won't venture far. I've asked Deputy Jenkins to keep an eye on the place at night. He's young but reliable. Blackwood glanced down at the twins, who were walking ahead, engrossed in their own conversation. Brave boys you've got. They've had to be, she replied. Life hasn't been gentle with them, nor with their mother, I suspect. His tone held no pity, only recognition of shared hardship. We endure, she said simply, as you have. His eyes met hers briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of similar wounds carried differently. Then he looked away, his focus returning to their surroundings. I'll depart for Helena within the hour, he said. Should be back by tomorrow afternoon at the latest. If it's Theo, I'll bring him home for a proper burial. The thought sent a chill through her. Despite never having met Theodore in person, she felt connected to him through his letters, through the home he'd prepared for her and her sons, through the mystery he'd left behind. And if it isn't him, she asked quietly, then the search continues. Blackwood's voice hardened with determination. I don't leave friends unaccounted for. Not after the war. Not ever. At Martha's boarding house, they found lunch laid out. In the small dining room, hearty beef stew and fresh bread that filled the space with its comforting aroma. Martha herself was absent, having left a note explaining she was attending a church committee meeting. The twins fell upon the food with enthusiasm, their morning at the clinic having sharpened their appetites. Blackwood declined to join them, citing the need to prepare for his journey, but he lingered at the doorway, seemingly reluctant to leave. "Keep Theodore's letter secure," he advised in a low voice. "And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, get word to Deputy Jenkins immediately." "We'll be cautious," she promised. He nodded, then surprised her by reaching out to briefly touch her hand, a gesture so quick she might have imagined it. "Until tomorrow, then." After his departure, the afternoon stretched before them with unexpected leisure. Abigail helped the twins with their letters and sums, using the slates Dr. Montgomery had provided. They were bright, eager learners, though. Ethan struggled with his writing, while Caleb showed particular aptitude for mathematics. As the day waned, Martha returned, bringing news from town and fresh-baked cookies that filled the boarding house with the scent of cinnamon and molasses. The twins delighted in helping her prepare the evening meal, listening wide-eyed to her tales of Pinecrest's early days. "This town wasn't even on the map when I arrived," she told them as they set the long dining table for the evening meal. "Just a collection of tents and makeshift shacks around a trading post. My late husband saw the potential, though. Built the general store when others said it was foolishness to put down permanent roots in such wild country." "Were there Indians?" Caleb asked, his voice hushed with both fear and excitement. Martha chuckled. "The Crow people were here long before any of us. They still pass through occasionally to trade. Good people, if treated with respect." She glanced at Abigail. "Your Theodore understood that better than most. Learned some of their language even. Said it was only proper if he was living on what had once been their hunting grounds." The casual mention of Theodore sent a pang through Abigail's heart. "Did he interact with them often?" "Every spring and fall when they came to trade," Martha replied, stirring a pot of beans on the stove. "Last autumn, he helped their medicine man treat an outbreak of fever in their camp. That earned him considerable respect." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "Some folks in town didn't approve of such fraternization. Caldwell in particular made his displeasure known." "Why would Caldwell care who Theodore associated with?" Abigail asked, her interest piqued. Martha's expression grew guarded. "The Crow know this land better than any of us ever will. Every stream, every cave, every mineral deposit." She gave Abigail a meaningful look. Information like that has value to a man with Caldwell's ambitions. Before Abigail could probe further, the boarding house door opened to admit 3 dusty ranch hands who rented rooms by the week. The conversation necessarily shifted to more general topics as the communal dinner commenced. That night, after the twins were asleep, Abigail sat by the window of their room, gazing out at the darkened street below. Deputy Jenkins passed by on his rounds, his lantern casting elongated shadows across the boardwalks. True to Blackwood's word, the young lawman paused near the boarding house, scanning the surrounding buildings before continuing on his way. Her thoughts turned to Theodore's letter and the mysterious box hidden beneath his barn floor. What secrets did it contain that were worth digging an empty grave as a warning? And if the body Blackwood was investigating proved to be Theodore's, what would that mean for her and the twins? The deed he had left them was a surprising gift, but also potentially a death sentence if Caldwell was willing to go to such lengths to acquire the property. Without Theodore, without proof of what had happened to him, she and her sons were vulnerable in ways that went beyond financial insecurity. Yet, retreating was not an option. Not only because they had nowhere else to go, but because something in Abigail rebelled at the thought of being driven away by threats and intimidation. She had endured her husband's slow, agonizing death. She had faced destitution in Philadelphia. She had crossed half a continent with 2 young children and nothing but a stranger's promise to sustain her. She would not be broken by Victor Caldwell's machinations, whatever they might be. A movement in the shadows across the street caught her attention. A figure stood in the doorway of the closed mercantile, barely visible in the darkness. For a moment, she thought it might be Deputy Jenkins returned on his rounds. But this man was shorter, broader in the shoulders. As he stepped slightly into the dim light of a distant lantern, she caught a glimpse of his face, one of Caldwell's men from outside the clinic. Her heart quickened. Despite Blackwood's precautions, they were being watched, whether as intimidation or prelude to something more sinister. She couldn't be certain. Carefully, without lighting a lamp that might reveal her awareness, Abigail moved away from the window. She checked the door latch, confirming it was secure, then pushed a chair beneath the handle for good measure. The twins slept on, oblivious to potential dangers. She settled herself on the small settee near their bed, Theodore's letter clutched in her hand like a talisman. Sleep would be elusive tonight, but vigilance was a familiar companion from her days nursing her dying husband. She would watch through the night, protecting her sons as she always had. Dawn found her still awake, though she had dozed intermittently throughout the night. The street outside was quiet now, Caldwell's man having departed before first light. Whether he had been relieved by another watcher, she couldn't be certain. The twins stirred, their morning routine of whispered conversations and stifled giggles a comforting counterpoint to her troubled thoughts. She rose, stretching muscles, stiff from her night on the settee, and began preparing for the day ahead. At breakfast downstairs, Martha noticed her fatigue immediately. "Didn't sleep well?" she asked, pouring coffee into Abigail's cup. "Can't say I blame you. Lot to process in just a few days." "It's been an adjustment," Abigail acknowledged, grateful for the older woman's perceptiveness. "And I find myself wondering what happens if Marshal Blackwood confirms the worst about Theodore." Martha's usually cheerful expression sobered. "Then we mourn him properly, and we make sure whoever is responsible faces justice." She patted Abigail's hand. "But don't borrow trouble, my dear. Silas Blackwood is thorough in his investigations. If that body in Helena isn't Theo's, he'll know it." The twins finished their breakfast and ran outside to the small garden behind the boarding house, their energy undiminished by the uncertainties surrounding them. Through the window, Abigail watched them playing some complicated game of their own invention, their faces alight with simple joy. "You've raised fine boys," Martha observed, following her gaze. "A credit to you and their father." "James did his best," Abigail said softly, remembering her late husband's patience with the twins, even as his illness progressed. He wanted so much for them, opportunities he never had. "And you've sacrificed to give them those opportunities," Martha noted, "coming all this way, starting fresh in a place where you knew no one." "I had little choice," Abigail admitted. "After James died, there was nothing left in Philadelphia but debt and painful memories. Theodore's letters offered hope for a different future." Martha studied her with surprising insight. And now, with Theodore missing and Caldwell circling like a vulture, Abigail sipped her coffee, considering the question. "Now I find myself unwilling to surrender what Theodore tried to provide, even in his absence. Not just the ranch, but the promise of a life where my sons can thrive." She met Martha's gaze steadily. "I may have come here as a mail-order bride, Martha, but I intend to stay as something more." "Good," the older woman said with approval. "This town needs more women with backbone. Too many men like Caldwell think they can simply buy or bully their way to what they want." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Montgomery, his medical bag in hand. He greeted them both, looking particularly pleased about something. "Mrs. Harlow, I've come with a proposition," he announced. Without preamble, Mrs. Wilson is due to deliver her child any day now. Given her history of difficult births, I'd like you to assist me. It would mean staying at their ranch until the baby arrives, perhaps 2 or 3 days. The twins would be welcome, of course. The Wilsons have children of similar age. The invitation was unexpected but appealing. The Wilson Ranch lay in the opposite direction from Theodore's property, away from Pinecrest and presumably Caldwell's immediate influence. "It sounds like valuable experience," she replied carefully. "When would we leave?" "This morning, if possible. Their ranch is about 3 hours' ride from town." Montgomery glanced out the window toward the twins. "I've brought my own wagon. There's plenty of room." Martha nodded encouragingly. "The Wilsons are good people. Their ranch is well established, with plenty of hands for security. Your room here will be waiting when you return." The decision wasn't difficult. A few days away from Pinecrest would give Blackwood time to return from Helena and report his findings without Caldwell's men monitoring her every reaction. It would also provide the twins with a change of scenery and playmates their own age. "We'll be ready within the hour," she told Montgomery. "Thank you for the opportunity." As she went upstairs to pack a few essentials for herself and the twins, Abigail couldn't shake the feeling that this temporary departure might be more significant than it appeared. Whatever awaited them at the Wilson Ranch, and whatever Blackwood discovered in Helena, would shape the path forward for her small family. She tucked Theodore's letter securely into her bodice, close to her heart. The mystery of the metal box would have to wait a little longer. But she had not forgotten it, nor the promise it represented. Answers about Theodore's fate and perhaps the key to securing the future he had intended for her and her sons in this wild, beautiful, dangerous territory. The Wilson Ranch sprawled across a verdant valley, its main house a substantial 2-story structure of lumber and riverstone. Unlike Theodore's modest cabin, this was a home built by generations of the same family, its weathered exterior speaking of permanence and prosperity. Outbuildings and corrals surrounded the house, and in the distance, cattle grazed on hillsides dotted with pine and aspen. Dr. Montgomery's wagon followed a well-maintained road to the main house, where they were greeted by Frank Wilson, a barrel-chested man with a sun-weathered face and calloused hands. He helped Abigail down from the wagon with unexpected gentleness. "Mrs. Harlow, we're mighty grateful you've come," he said, his voice carrying the soft drawl of Kentucky. "My Sarah's been asking for a woman's presence these last days. Her mother passed last winter, and this being her 4th child." He trailed off, emotion momentarily overtaking him. "I'm honored to help," Abigail replied sincerely, "and my sons are grateful for the opportunity to meet your children." As if summoned by her words, 3 tow-headed children burst from the house, followed more sedately by a slender woman whose advanced pregnancy was evident beneath her loose dress. Despite her condition, Sarah Wilson's face glowed with welcome. "You must be Abigail," she called. "Frank's been telling me about Theodore Weston's intended since we heard of your arrival. I'm sorry for the circumstances, but I confess I'm selfishly glad you're here." All the women connected instantly, recognizing in each other the special resilience that frontier wives developed by necessity. Within an hour, Abigail was settled in a comfortable guest room, with the twins installed in an adjacent chamber that normally housed the Wilson boys. The children had already disappeared to explore the ranch, promises to stay within sight of the house forgotten almost immediately. Dr. Montgomery examined Sarah thoroughly, then consulted with Abigail in the hallway outside the bedroom. "First stage of labor," he confirmed quietly. "Still early, but progressing faster than I expected. I'd estimate the child will arrive before tomorrow morning." "Any concerns?" Abigail asked, recalling his mention of Sarah's history of difficult births. "The baby's position seems ideal and Sarah's strength is good, but her last delivery nearly took her life, excessive bleeding after the child was born." His expression grew serious. "I've prepared additional ergot and will need your vigilance once the baby arrives." Abigail nodded her understanding. "I'll prepare clean cloths and hot water, and perhaps a tincture of raspberry leaf to strengthen the womb." Montgomery regarded her with new respect. Indeed, you've had midwifery experience beyond what you mentioned. Zachem. My grandmother was known for her skill with birthing mothers, she explained. I observed many deliveries as a girl before my marriage took me to the city. A fortunate coincidence for Mrs. Wilson, he remarked, though his tone suggested he believed it was more than mere chance. The day progressed steadily, with Sarah alternating between periods of restless discomfort and calm conversation. She and Abigail sat together on the wide porch during the afternoon, watching the children play an elaborate game involving the woodpile and several obliging ranch dogs. They adapt so quickly, Sarah noted, watching Caleb and Ethan integrate seamlessly with her own brood. Children are resilient that way. Sometimes too much so, Abigail agreed. They've had to be strong through many changes. Sarah studied her with the frank curiosity of a woman unbound by city conventions. Theodore Weston was a good man, quiet but kind. Frank always said he had the touch with horses that can't be learned. She placed a hand on her swollen belly as the baby kicked. When he started corresponding with you, he seemed lighter somehow, hopeful in a way we hadn't seen before. Abigail felt her throat tighten. His letters changed my life, gave me hope when I had none. Frank says Marshal Blackwood won't rest until he finds out what happened, Sarah continued. Those two served together in the war, different regiments, but they crossed paths at Shiloh. There's a bond there that goes beyond friendship. This was new information. Abigail filed it away, adding another layer to her understanding of the connection between Theodore and Blackwood. The marshal mentioned riding to Helena today to investigate a discovery. Sarah's expression sobered. We heard. Frank's brother works the stage line. News travels faster than official word out here. She hesitated. Whatever happens, Mrs. Harlow, Abigail, you should know that Pinecrest takes care of its own. And Theodore claimed you and your boys as his, which makes you part of this community now. The simple declaration of belonging touched Abigail deeply. Before she could respond, Sarah gasped, clutching her stomach as a stronger contraction seized. I think, she managed through gritted teeth, we should find the doctor now. The birthing process consumed the remainder of the day and most of the night. Sarah labored with the determined grace of a woman who had done this before, but as midnight passed with no baby, her strength began to flag. Dr. Montgomery maintained his calm professionalism, but Abigail caught the worried glances he cast toward the window, where dawn would eventually appear. The child resists, he murmured to Abigail during a brief respite when Sarah dozed between contractions. I may need to intervene if progress doesn't resume soon. Abigail dampened a cloth and gently wiped Sarah's perspiring forehead. Would walking help? I've seen it speed a stubborn labor. Montgomery considered this. Worth trying, though she's quite fatigued. When Sarah woke with the next wave of pain, Abigail suggested the walking. With the doctor's support on one side and Abigail's on the other, Sarah circled the bedroom slowly, pausing to breathe through contractions. By the third circuit, something shifted. Sarah felt it first, a sensation of the baby finally moving downward. That's it, Montgomery encouraged. The child is engaging properly now. From that point, events moved swiftly. Sarah returned to the bed, and within an hour, her cries of effort culminated in the wailing protest of a newborn entering the world. A daughter, red-faced and robust, with her father's distinctive cleft chin. But Abigail had no time to celebrate. As Montgomery had feared, the bleeding began almost immediately, a steady crimson flow that soaked the birthing sheets with alarming speed. Sarah, exhausted from her ordeal, barely registered the danger as she cradled her infant. Ergot tincture, Montgomery ordered sharply, his hands already working to expel the afterbirth and contract the womb, and prepare the cold compresses as we discussed. Abigail moved with practiced efficiency, administering the medicine and applying the compresses while Montgomery worked to stem the hemorrhage. For 20 tense minutes, they fought the tide of blood, their quiet commands and movements belying the gravity of the situation. Frank Wilson paced the hallway outside, his heavy footsteps a counterpoint to their urgent work. Dawn had just broken when Montgomery finally straightened, wiping his brow with a sleeve. "The bleeding has stopped," he announced quietly. "She'll be weak for some time, but I believe the danger has passed." Relief washed over Abigail like a physical wave. She smoothed Sarah's damp hair back from her pale face and adjusted the sleeping infant in the crook of her mother's arm. "You did wonderfully," she murmured to the exhausted woman. "Rest now. We'll watch over you both." When Frank was allowed in to see his wife and new daughter, his face crumpled with emotion. "Doc," he said hoarsely, clasping Montgomery's hand, "I can't ever repay you for this, or you, Mrs. Harlow." "Your wife did the hard work," Montgomery replied, though Abigail could see the fatigue and relief in his eyes as well. "Mrs. Harlow's assistance was invaluable, however. You have a strong daughter and a brave wife, Mr. Wilson." Abigail slipped from the room to give the family privacy, her own exhaustion finally catching up with her. She found her way to the kitchen, where the Wilsons' housekeeper, a native woman named Mary Elk Medicine, pressed a cup of strong coffee into her hands. "You bring new life," the woman said in accented English. "Good medicine." "Thank you," Abigail replied, gratefully accepting the coffee and sinking into a chair at the kitchen table. It was a difficult night. Mary nodded, her dark eyes assessing Abigail with quiet intelligence. "You carry old knowledge, not just doctor medicine." The observation was surprisingly perceptive. "My grandmother was a midwife," Abigail acknowledged. "She taught me some of her ways before she passed. Grandmother medicine is strong medicine." Mary set a plate of freshly baked bread and preserves before her. "You eat now, then sleep. Children are with mine, watching new foals in barn." The thought of the twins safely occupied was a relief. Abigail ate mechanically, her mind reviewing the night's events while her body cried out for rest. She had just finished when Dr. Montgomery entered the kitchen, looking as tired as she felt. "Mrs. Wilson is sleeping peacefully," he reported, accepting his own coffee from Mary with a grateful nod. "The child is strong and nursing well already." He settled into the chair across from Abigail. "Your assistance was exemplary, Mrs. Harlow. You have a natural gift for medical work." "Thank you, Doctor. It felt good to be useful." "More than useful," he corrected. "Essential. I've lost patients to postpartum hemorrhage before, even with another doctor assisting. Your calm efficiency made the difference." His praise warmed her, but exhaustion was quickly overtaking any sense of accomplishment. Montgomery seemed to notice, for he added, "Mary has prepared a room for you to rest. I suggest you take advantage of it while the children are occupied." "I'll keep watch over Mrs. Wilson." Abigail didn't resist the suggestion. The guest room was cool and quiet, its simple furnishings welcoming after the intensity of the night's work. She managed only to remove her shoes before collapsing onto the bed, sleep claiming her almost instantly. Dreams came swiftly, fragmented. Images of Theodore's empty grave, of Caldwell's threatening smile, of Blackwood riding alone toward Helena. In her dream, she stood on the porch of Theodore's cabin, watching as a dark shape emerged from the tree line. Not Blackwood returning, but a figure she couldn't quite identify, carrying something in its arms, a burden wrapped in cloth that dripped crimson into the dust. She woke with a start to find late afternoon light slanting through the bedroom window. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. This wasn't Martha's boarding house nor Theodore's cabin. Then memory returned. The Wilson Ranch, Sarah's difficult delivery, the precious few hours of exhausted sleep. A soft knock at the door preceded Mary's entrance. "You sleep long," the woman observed, setting a basin of fresh water on the washstand. "Good medicine for tired body. Children ask for you. They in garden with new baby sister." Abigail splashed water on her face, the coolness banishing the last cobwebs of unsettling dreams. "How is Mrs. Wilson?" "Strong woman, already sitting, up for short time." Mary handed her a clean towel. "Visitor come while you sleep. Man with star, talk with doctor now." Blackwood. He must have ridden directly to the Wilson ranch upon his return from Helena, rather than stopping first in Pinecrest. The realization sent a flutter of anxiety through Abigail's chest. What news did he bring? She quickly tidied herself, smoothing her rumpled dress and pinning her hair in a simple knot. When she emerged onto the porch, she found the twins engaged in helping the Wilson children construct an elaborate miniature fort from twigs and stones. They waved to her, but remained absorbed in their play. Dr. Montgomery and Marshal Blackwood sat at the far end of the porch, their conversation halting abruptly at her appearance. Blackwood rose immediately, removing his hat. Even from a distance, Abigail could see the fatigue etched in his face, the dust of hard travel still clinging to his coat. "Mrs. Harlow," he greeted her, his voice carefully neutral. "I hope I'm not intruding on your work here." "Not at all, Marshal." She studied his expression, searching for clues about his findings in Helena. "The difficult part is behind us. Mrs. Wilson delivered a healthy daughter early this morning." Montgomery cleared his throat. "I was just telling the Marshal about your exceptional assistance during a critical moment. Mrs. Wilson might not have survived without your quick action." Blackwood's gaze remained fixed on her face. "Dr. Montgomery suggested I might find you here when I returned to town. I thought it best to deliver my news directly." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken questions. Finally, Abigail steeled herself to ask, "The body in Helena, was it Theodore?" He glanced toward the children playing in the yard, then back to her. "Perhaps we could speak privately." Montgomery rose. "Use the study. Through the main hall, first door on the left. I'll keep an eye on the children." Blackwood guided her inside with a light touch at her elbow. The Wilsons' study was a masculine space of leather-bound books and hunting trophies, with a large oak desk dominating the room. Once the door closed behind them, Abigail turned to face him directly. "Please," she said simply, "whatever you discovered, I need to know." He exhaled slowly, his shoulders seeming to carry a new weight since she'd last seen him. "It wasn't Theo," he said finally. "The body belonged to a prospector named Samuel Finch, missing from his claim near Helena for about 2 weeks. Identification was difficult due to the condition of the remains, but certain personal effects were conclusive." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by confusion. Then Theodore could still be alive. "It's possible," Blackwood acknowledged. "But there's more, Abigail. Finch wasn't just any prospector. He was surveying land for Victor Caldwell's mining consortium, the same group that's been trying to establish operations throughout the territory, including near Theo's ranch." She absorbed this information, connecting it to what they already knew. "And he was killed?" Blackwood nodded grimly. "Shot in the back at close range, then partially. Buried in a rock slide to disguise the murder. If not for spring runoff exposing the site, he might never have been found." "You think there's a connection to Theodore's disappearance?" "I know there is." Blackwood moved to the window, glancing out at the peaceful ranch yard before continuing. "While in Helena, I spoke with the clerk at the Territorial land office. The deed Theo filed for you and your sons is authentic and legally binding. But there was something else registered just 2 days before his disappearance, a mineral rights claim for his property." Abigail's breath caught. "Filed by Caldwell?" "By Theo himself." Blackwood turned back to face her. "According to the filing, he discovered a significant copper deposit in the northwest corner of his land, near the creek that feeds the valley. He registered the claim in his own name, not with any mining company. Which means he owned not just the land, but the legal right to whatever minerals lie beneath it. Blackwood's expression hardened. Exactly what Caldwell has been trying to acquire throughout the region. The pieces began falling into place. So the empty grave wasn't just a warning, it was a message. They want something from him. That's my thinking, Blackwood agreed. Finch was killed because he discovered something Caldwell's people wanted kept secret. I suspect Theo stumbled onto the same information. He hesitated. There's one more thing. The land office had a record of Theo making the final payment on his mortgage 3 months ago, with a receipt signed by the bank president himself. Caldwell's claim about outstanding debt is fabricated, just as you suspected. Abigail's mind raced with the implications. We need to find that metal box Theodore mentioned in his letter. It must contain proof of what he discovered, maybe even evidence of who's responsible for his disappearance. I agree, Blackwood said, but we need to move carefully. If Caldwell suspects we're close to finding evidence against him, he might take more direct action. His gaze softened slightly. I don't want you or your boys in the line of fire, Abigail. The concern in his voice touched her. We already are, Silas. From the moment I stepped off that stagecoach, Caldwell saw me as a complication to his plans. If the deed Theodore filed is valid, then my sons and I stand between him and what he wants. All the more reason to proceed with caution, he insisted. I've sent a wire to the federal marshal's office in Bozeman requesting assistance with the investigation. Until they arrive, our best strategy is to appear compliant while gathering evidence. She considered his words, weighing the risks against the need for answers. How soon can we search the barn at Theodore's ranch? Tonight, he said decisively. I've arranged for Hank to take the cattle to the north pasture, which will draw away anyone watching the property. We can approach from the ridge behind the homestead after dark. He hesitated. But you should remain here with your sons where it's safe. I can search for the box alone. Abigail shook her head firmly. Theodore addressed that letter to me. The deed is in my name. Whatever is in that box was meant for me to find. She met his gaze steadily. I'm coming with you, Silas. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. We'll leave after supper, once the children are settled for the night. Dr. Montgomery has agreed to stay with them here. The plan established, they rejoined the others outside. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a curious blend of domesticity and tension, Abigail helping Mary prepare supper while checking on Sarah and the newborn. The twins blissfully engaged with their new friends, all while the weight of the evening's dangerous mission hung over her. Frank Wilson, informed of the situation by Blackwood, insisted on providing his best horses for their night ride. Theo Weston helped me break that stallion when no one else could get near him, he said, gruffly. Least I can do is lend him out for finding what happened to the man. As dusk approached, Abigail gathered the twins for their evening routine, explaining that she needed to help Marshal Blackwood with an important task. Like a secret mission? Caleb asked, eyes wide with excitement. Something like that. She acknowledged, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. You'll stay here with Dr. Montgomery and the Wilsons until I return tomorrow. Is it dangerous? Ethan's perception, as always, cut straight to the heart of the matter. Abigail chose her words carefully. It's important work that might help. Let's understand what happened to Mr. Weston. The Marshal will be with me the entire time. The boys exchanged a look that spoke volumes, their private twin communication that had fascinated and occasionally unnerved her since their infancy. You'll be careful? Caleb asked finally. Very careful, she promised, drawing them both into an embrace. Now, be good for Dr. Montgomery and help with the younger children while I'm away. After tucking them into bed in the Wilson boys' room, she changed into riding clothes borrowed from Sarah, sturdy trousers and a flannel shirt beneath a warm jacket. The masculine attire felt strange after years of proper dresses, but the practicality was undeniable for their night ride. When she descended to the main floor, she found Blackwood waiting by the front door, his expression shifting to surprise at her changed appearance. "Mrs. Wilson's clothes," she explained, feeling suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. She insisted they would be more suitable than a dress. "She was right," he agreed, recovering quickly. "We'll be moving through rough country in the dark. Practicality matters more than convention tonight." Frank Wilson joined them, carrying a rifle which he handed to Blackwood. "Just in case," he said grimly. "And take this." He passed a smaller revolver to Abigail. "Sarah insists, says a woman alone should always have protection, especially in these parts." The weight of the weapon was unfamiliar in her hand. "I've never fired a gun," she admitted. "Simple enough," Wilson replied. "Point and squeeze. It's already loaded 5 shots. Just keep it in your pocket unless you need it." As they mounted the horses in the ranch yard, Dr. Montgomery emerged from the house to see them off. "I'll keep the children entertained with stories of my adventures as a field surgeon," he promised Abigail. "Suitably edited for young ears, of course." "Thank you, Doctor, for everything." She settled into the saddle, more comfortable on horseback than she'd expected after years in the city. Blackwood led the way down the ranch road, their pace leisurely until they were well beyond sight of the main house. Then he increased their speed, guiding them off the main trail and into the shelter of a pine forest that would conceal their approach to Theodore's property. The moon rose as they rode, bathing the landscape in silver light. Abigail found herself struck by the wild beauty of the Montana night, the vastness of the star-filled sky, the silhouettes of mountains against the horizon, the occasional call of a nightbird or distant coyote. Despite the gravity of their mission, something in her responded to this untamed wilderness, so different from Philadelphia's crowded streets and sooty air. "It gets under your skin," Blackwood commented quietly, noticing her wonder. "This country changes how you see everything once you've lived in it a while. It's beautiful," she acknowledged. "Dangerous, but beautiful. Like most worthwhile things," he replied, with a glance that suggested he meant more than just the landscape. They rode in companionable silence after that, following game trails and shallow creek beds to avoid the main roads where they might be seen. As the night deepened, Blackwood guided them up a steep ridge that overlooked Theodore's Valley from the east, a direction few would expect visitors to approach from. Dismounting in a small clearing, they secured the horses to a fallen log. "We'll go on foot from here," Blackwood explained in a low voice, less chance of being heard. "The barn is on the far side of the clearing, away from the main house. If Caldwell has men watching, they'll likely be focused on the house and the road approach." Abigail nodded her understanding, following his lead as they made their way carefully. Down the wooded slope, the valley spread before them, Theodore's cabin a dark silhouette against the moonlit pasture. No lights burned in the windows, no smoke rose from the chimney. The property appeared deserted. But as they neared the edge of the trees, Blackwood suddenly raised his hand in warning, dropping to a crouch. Abigail followed suit, her heart pounding. "Movement by the corral," he whispered, pointing toward a shadow that detached itself from the fence line and moved toward the barn, their destination. "One of Caldwell's men," she breathed. "Most likely. We'll have to wait until he moves on." They crouched in silence, watching as the figure completed a circuit of the barn and then headed toward the main house. Once he disappeared around the corner, Blackwood touched her arm lightly. "Now, stay low and move quickly." They crossed the open ground between the forest and the barn in a crouching run, the soft earth muffling their footsteps. The barn door was secured with a simple wooden latch, which Blackwood lifted silently. Then they were inside, enveloped in darkness, scented with hay and leather. Blackwood produced a small folding lantern from his coat pocket, lighting it with practiced efficiency. The warm glow revealed stalls for horses, now empty, and farming equipment carefully arranged along one wall. "The southeast corner," Abigail whispered, recalling Theodore's letter, "under the tool rack." They made their way to the specified location, where a large wooden rack held an assortment of shovels, pitchforks, and other implements. Blackwood handed her the lantern and carefully moved the rack aside, revealing the wooden floorboards beneath. "Look for one that seems loose," he instructed quietly. Abigail knelt, holding the lantern close to the floor as they both examined the boards. It was she who found it, a plank that moved slightly when pressed at one end. "Here," she whispered. Urgently, Blackwood produced a knife and carefully pried up the board, revealing a small cavity beneath. And there, just as Theodore had described, sat a metal box about the size of a large book. He lifted it out carefully, testing its weight. "Locked," he murmured, noting the small padlock securing the clasp. "The key must be—" Abigail began, but froze at the sound of the barn door opening behind them. "Well now," drawled a familiar voice, "isn't this an interesting development?" They turned slowly to find Victor Caldwell standing in the doorway, a pistol gleaming in his hand. Behind him loomed two of his men, similarly armed. Marshal Blackwood and the widow Harlow, trespassing on private property in the middle of the night. Caldwell's smile was cold in the lantern light. "How fortunate I decided to check on my investment personally this evening." Blackwood shifted slightly, positioning himself between Abigail and Caldwell's gun. The metal box remained clutched in his left hand, held close against his body. "This property belongs to Mrs. Harlow and her sons," he said evenly, "as legally documented at the Territorial Land Office. We're hardly trespassing." Caldwell's smile didn't waver. "Ah yes, that convenient deed Weston filed before he vanished. Curious timing, wouldn't you say? Almost as if he expected something to happen to him." He gestured toward the box with his pistol. "And now you've found whatever he left behind. I admit I'm intrigued. What secrets was Theodore keeping, I wonder?" Abigail stood slowly, her hand drifting toward the pocket where Frank Wilson's revolver rested. "The only secret here is what you did to him," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "and why you've fabricated claims against property that's fully paid for." "Brave words from a woman in your position." Caldwell's gaze hardened. "But ultimately irrelevant. Hand over the box, Marshal, and perhaps we can resolve this situation without further unpleasantness." Blackwood remained motionless. "Federal evidence in an active investigation, Caldwell. You know I can't do that." "Federal investigation?" Caldwell laughed, the sound echoing harshly in the barn's confines. "Based on what? A missing rancher who likely ran off to avoid his debts? An empty grave that could have been dug by anyone? You've overplayed your hand, Marshal." "And Samuel Finch?" Blackwood countered. "The surveyor found murdered near Helena? Was that merely coincidence?" Something flickered in Caldwell's eyes, surprise quickly masked. "I have no knowledge of any surveyor. Now, for the final time, surrender the box." "No." Abigail's refusal rang clear in the tense silence. "Whatever Theodore placed in that box, he meant for me to find. It belongs to my sons and me." Caldwell's patience visibly thinned. "Mrs. Harlow, while I admire your maternal devotion, you should consider your son's future more carefully. They need a living mother far more than they need whatever trinkets Weston left behind." The threat hung in the air between them. Abigail's fingers closed around the revolver in her pocket, though she knew drawing it would likely only worsen their situation. "Your men are watching," Blackwood observed coolly. 2 lawmen murdered on the same night? That's a hanging offense, Caldwell. Even your money won't shield you from that. The banker's expression tightened with calculation. Accidents happen in the wilderness, Marshal. A barn fire, 2 unfortunate souls trapped inside. A tragedy, but hardly murder. As he spoke, one of his men moved toward the lantern and the hay scattered nearby, his intentions clear. Abigail, he felt cold fear settle in her stomach. They didn't intend merely to take the box. They planned to eliminate all evidence, including witnesses. "You won't get away with this," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "People know where we are. Dr. Montgomery, the Wilsons." "Circumstantial," Caldwell dismissed, "and easily countered by my men's testimony that we came to investigate trespassers and found the barn already ablaze. Tragic, but not our responsibility." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "Last chance to reconsider, Caldwell. This ends badly for you." "I believe that's my line, Marshal." The banker nodded to his men. "Secure them. Then we'll discuss the proper disposal of..." The sound of a rifle being cocked echoed sharply from the barn doorway. "Ain't nobody disposing of nothing tonight," came a gravelly voice. All heads turned to find Hank, Theodore's ranch hand, standing in the entrance, his rifle trained steadily on Caldwell. Beside him stood Deputy Jenkins, his own weapon drawn. Caldwell's momentary surprise quickly shifted to calculation. "Ah, the hired help and the boy deputy. How touching, but still outnumbered, I'm afraid." "You might want to count again," called another voice as Dr. Montgomery stepped into view, a shotgun in his hands. Behind him, Frank Wilson and 2 of his ranch hands moved into position, all armed. Blackwood's smile was cold. "You see, Caldwell, while you were busy having my movements watched in town, I was arranging a welcoming party should anything go wrong tonight." For the first time, genuine uncertainty crossed Caldwell's face. He glanced at his men, measuring the changed odds. "Lower your weapons," Deputy Jenkins ordered. "All of you, now." A tense moment passed. Then, with obvious reluctance, Caldwell slowly lowered his pistol. His men, following his lead, did the same. "This changes nothing," Caldwell said tightly. "You have no proof of any wrongdoing on my part, merely speculation and whatever fabrications Weston may have left in that box. We'll let a judge determine." "That," Blackwood replied, finally setting the metal box on a nearby workbench. "In the meantime, you're under arrest for threatening an officer of the law and conspiracy to commit arson." As Deputy Jenkins moved forward to secure Caldwell and his men, Abigail released her grip on the revolver in her pocket, her hand trembling with delayed reaction. Dr. Montgomery approached, concern evident in his expression. "Mrs. Harlow, are you injured?" "No," she managed, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "The children, safe with Mary and Mrs. Wilson," he assured her. "I came as soon as they were settled." Blackwood joined them, his face tight with suppressed anger. "I shouldn't have brought you into this if they had harmed you." "But they didn't," she interrupted gently, "thanks to your foresight." She glanced toward the workbench where the metal box sat. "What now?" His expression softened slightly. "Now we find out what Theo wanted you to know." The padlock on the box yielded easily to a set of small tools Blackwood produced from his coat pocket. As the lid creaked open, they gathered around, the lantern casting long shadows across their faces. Inside lay several items: a leather-bound journal, a small canvas pouch, and an envelope addressed simply to Abigail. "Another letter," she whispered, reaching for it with trembling fingers. As she carefully broke the seal, Blackwood lifted the journal, flipping through pages filled with Theodore's neat handwriting. "Survey notes," he observed. "Geological findings, coordinates." His eyes widened. "And records of meetings with Caldwell's consortium, detailed accounts of their offers and his refusals." Abigail unfolded the letter. Theodore's familiar handwriting bringing an unexpected ache to her chest. She read aloud, "My dear Abigail, if you are reading this, then matters have progressed as I feared they might. First, let me offer my deepest apologies for bringing you and your sons into a situation that has proven more dangerous than I anticipated. 3 months ago, I discovered a significant copper deposit on my land while digging a new well. Initial testing confirmed its value, which I estimated conservatively at over $50,000. Victor Caldwell's mining consortium approached me shortly thereafter, offering to purchase my property for a fraction of its worth. When I declined, their tactics became increasingly aggressive. Threats were made, thinly veiled but unmistakable. I registered my mineral claim legally and made final payment on my mortgage, securing both documents with witnesses. Copies are included in this journal. More disturbing, I discovered evidence that Caldwell's operation has been using fraudulent assay reports to attract Eastern investors, while simultaneously forcing smaller landowners to sell through intimidation and sabotage. I've documented what I could, including conversations overheard between Caldwell and his associates. I've entrusted Marshal Blackwood with a deed to my property in your name, believing that whatever happens to me, you and your sons deserve the security I promised in my letters. The copper claim alone should provide handsomely for your future, should you choose to develop or sell it. Know that every word I wrote to you about my desire for a family was sincere. The thought of you and your boys bringing life to this quiet valley sustained me through these difficult weeks. With deepest regret and enduring hope, Theodore Weston." Silence fell as she finished reading. Blackwood closed the journal carefully, his expression grim. "This is what got him killed," he said quietly. "Evidence of fraud that would have ruined Caldwell and his investors." Montgomery nodded grimly. "And explains why they wanted the property so badly. Not just for the copper, but to bury the evidence literally and figuratively." Abigail refolded the letter, her mind racing with its implications. But where is Theodore? If they killed him, where is his body? "That," came a strained voice from the barn doorway, "is a fair question." They turned in unison to find a gaunt figure leaning heavily against the frame, his clothes torn and dirty, his face half hidden by an unkempt beard. But there was no mistaking the intelligent eyes that locked onto Abigail's with powerful recognition. "Theodore," she whispered. Blackwood was at the man's side in an instant, supporting him as his legs threatened to buckle. "Theo, we thought you were—" "Not for lack of trying on their part," Theodore Weston replied weakly. "They kept me in an abandoned mine shaft, meant to force me to sign over the mineral rights, I think. But the spring rains caused a collapse." He coughed, the sound rattling in his chest. "I've been trying to make my way back for days." Montgomery hurried forward, his doctor's instincts taking over as he helped guide Theodore to a hay bale. "You need medical attention. Dehydration, exposure, possibly pneumonia from the looks of it." But Theodore's gaze remained fixed on Abigail, as if drinking in the sight of her. "You came," he said simply, "despite everything." "I did," she confirmed, moving closer. "My sons and I arrived just as we promised." A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. "The boys, are they well?" "They are." She knelt beside him, this stranger whose letters had changed her life, whose absence had thrust her into danger, and whose return now changed everything once again. "They're excited about the horses you promised them." He laughed, the sound dissolving into another cough. "I'll keep that promise. All of them." Outside, they could hear Deputy Jenkins leading Caldwell and his men away, the bankers' protests fading into the night. Frank Wilson approached, his expression a mixture of shock and relief at Theodore's appearance. "Thought we'd be burying you soon, Theo," he said gruffly, emotion roughening his voice. Not yet, Frank. Theodore's gaze returned to Abigail. I have a family to get to know first. Blackwood stepped back, watching this reunion with unreadable eyes. Abigail caught his gaze, a moment of understanding passing between them, acknowledgement of a connection formed through danger and shared purpose, now necessarily changed by Theodore's return. Theodore noticed the exchange, his perception keen, despite his weakened state. "You've taken care of her, Silas," he said quietly, "as I knew you would." "She took care of herself, mostly," Blackwood replied, his tone carefully neutral. "Mrs. Harlow has more courage than most men I've known." "Abigail," Theodore corrected gently. "Her name is Abigail." He reached for her hand, his touch light but deliberate, and I've waited a long time to say it aloud. In that moment, looking into the eyes of the man whose letters had offered her hope when she had none, Abigail felt the strange sensation of worlds realigning. The future she had imagined on the stagecoach, then thought lost forever, now shimmered with renewed possibility. Yet something else had been born in the danger and uncertainty of the past days. A strength she hadn't known she possessed, and connections she hadn't expected to form. Glancing at Blackwood's carefully composed expression, she recognized the complexity of what lay ahead. "We should get you to the Wilson Ranch," Montgomery was saying, examining Theodore's injured leg. "You need proper care, and Mrs. Wilson has just delivered a healthy daughter who I'm sure would appreciate a visit from her godfather once you're recovered." Theodore nodded, allowing them to help him to his feet. "And Caldwell will face federal charges," Blackwood assured him. "Your documentation, combined with what we've gathered about Samuel Finch's murder, should be more than enough to put him away for good." As they prepared to leave the barn, Theodore paused, turning to Abigail once more. "I know this isn't how either of us imagined our first meeting," he said softly, "and I would understand if recent events have changed your feelings about our arrangement." She studied him thoughtfully, this man she knew intimately through his written words, yet was only now meeting in person. "We have time to become acquainted properly now," she said. "No decisions need to be rushed." He accepted this with a grateful nod. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, the stars blazed overhead in the vast Montana sky. Theodore's gaze swept over his property, the cabin he had built, the land he had worked, the future he had planned. "Home," he murmured, then looked at Abigail and added, "Almost." Blackwood helped him onto a wagon that Frank Wilson had brought forward, then stepped back, his duty fulfilled, yet something unresolved lingering in his stance. Abigail approached him while the others attended to Theodore. "Marshal," she began, then corrected herself. "Silas, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." "No thanks needed," he replied quietly. "I was searching for a friend. Found him." His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "And perhaps something else along the way." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and moved toward his horse. "I'll escort Caldwell and his men to the Territorial prison myself. Make sure there are no mishaps along the way." "And then?" she asked, the question holding more meaning than its simple words suggested. A faint smile touched his lips. "Then I return to my duties in Pinecrest. The territory still needs its law enforcement, Mrs. Harlow." "Abigail," she reminded him softly. He nodded once, the gesture an acknowledgement of boundaries both crossed and newly established. "Abigail, take care of Theo and those boys of yours." As their unusual procession made its way back toward the Wilson Ranch, Theodore in the wagon with Dr. Montgomery, Frank and his men providing escort, and Abigail riding alongside, she found herself contemplating the strange turns of fate that had brought her to this moment. She had come west as a mail-order bride, seeking security for her sons through marriage to a stranger. She had discovered an empty grave, faced danger, and found unexpected strength within herself. And now Theodore Weston, the man whose letters had changed her life, had returned from presumed death to reclaim his place in the future they had both imagined. Yet something else had emerged during those days of uncertainty. A woman who could stand on her own, who could face down threats and forge her own connections. Whatever came next, whether with Theodore or on her own, Abigail Harlow knew she would never again be merely a mail-order bride. She had become something more, a woman of the frontier, resilient and unbowed, ready to build a life in this wild, beautiful land that had challenged and changed her irrevocably. As they crested the rise that would take them beyond sight of Theodore's ranch, Abigail glanced back one last time. In the moonlight, she could just make out Marshal Blackwood's silhouette as he prepared to escort his prisoners toward Pinecrest. For a moment he paused, looking in her direction as if sensing her gaze. Then he raised his hand in a final salute before turning his horse toward town. The future, with all its complexities and possibilities, awaited them all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.